Hi, Scott, and welcome to my channel, Jojo Fry Rocks. It is amazing to have you on here. So I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me.
No, Jojo, thank you for being on. This is awesome.
And just, for the people on my channel who watch regularly, who might not know who you are, I'm sure a lot of them already do. But would you like to just introduce yourself and your awesome channel?
For anyone that has watched my channel, clearly I have no problem with talking about the Prog Corner. I started the channel about 2.5 years ago, just to talk specifically about one genre that I felt was a little underrepresented on YouTube. So surprise, the channel really took off. And, so we have been really blessed and really fortunate in that we're in a position now where, we're like one of the gurus or mentors of prog rock on YouTube. It's kind of fun. It's ridiculous. But, the thing I love about prog is that it really never took itself as seriously as people said it did. So I try to bring a little bit of levity and humor and, lightheartedness to the festivities because, music should be fun, Jojo, right? That's the main thing. And I try to bring a little bit of excitement and energy to the proceedings. And, some people might like it, some people don't, but, it's YouTube, it's a show. So, I give people what they want, which is just talking about prog.
That's how I came across you. So in this little mini series that I'm doing, which is really about trying to push my own kind of musical boundaries, I guess, and trying to, branch out of my little...
What a great title, by the way.
Guilty DISpleasures.
Guilty DISpleasures. That's awesome.
I feel bad. I feel guilty that I haven't ever explored like some of these really huge and important and influential genres of music just because I've been in my sort of 80s and 90s rock bubble. Yeah. So I'm trying to kind of branch out of that. And that was how I first came across Andy Edwards' channel.
Oh,
and
okay.
That's how I came across your channel.
Yeah.
And I've loved watching your beef.
That was fun. Yeah, we had for those that don't know, Andy Edwards and I, we kind of contacted each other ahead of time. It was a manufactured beef, but again, on point. Just having some fun with the genre, and obviously the bone of contention was whether or not Rush drummer Neil Peart is or is not overrated, which is just the most ridiculous thing for an American and a British guy to be arguing about a Canadian drummer. But I guess a few people caught on pretty quickly that it was all manufactured. But it was a lot of fun. In fact. I'm already working on my next beef, but I'm going to be the beef guy on the internet, I guess.
Well, I hope we don't end up in a beef.
No, I never start it. They just come after me. That's a whole nother story. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what I consider to be the greatest genre of music of all time. And I understand why you might be approaching it and having a few questions because it is not the easiest genre, to jump into. And I gave you a playlist of 12 tracks, and that doesn't sound like that's a whole lot, but it's prog rock, so the thing was like 4 hours long.
Yeah. It took. I mean, thanks for sending it a couple of weeks ahead of time because it has kind of taken like all of that time to get to work through it. It's not, I couldn't just sit down and go through it in one sort of go.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But I just wanted to kind of find out a little bit about how you first came across it and got into it because, a lot of us, our favourite music and our favourite genres, we tend to get into when we're quite young.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the 80s. The decade of hair metal. So, when I was growing up, and then I was a teenager in the 90s when grunge came along. So those are the things, that were early influences on me and that I absolutely fell in love with. But those are things I would say that are quite accessible musically and meant to be.
The music industry has always been driven by those people that are of that certain age where music matters more than anything else in your entire life. And I think you might have hit the nail right on the head. I think it's 13, right? When you're 13 years old, something's going on in that brain. And oddly enough, I was not alone, because I'm looking at the 70s, and you had artists like Jethro, Tull, had back-to-back #1 albums in the 70s with one song on it. One song. And both Thick as a Brick and A Passion Play hit #1. Yes was ginormous. Emerson, Lake and Palmer was selling out stadiums all across North America. These bands were huge. So yeah, the idea that a 13-year-old kid could be latching onto this classically inspired, really complicated kind of stuff seems bizarre. But it was happening. It was a weird thing going on in the 70s. Now, I grew up in a very musical house. My dad was a jazz musician, so there was a lot of Zappa and Miles Davis and, all that kind of weird stuff going on in my house. So, but that wasn't my music. The Beatles, my dad loved the Beatles. So I was like searching for something that was my own. And I think what really did it for me was when I got a brother 5 years older than me, and he came back from college and he had a cassette tape that had Yes on one side, Emerson, Lake and Palmer on the other. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I found my tribe. I'd found my music. It was complicated like jazz. I was a classical guitar player, so it had those classical influences that I liked, but it still was rock and roll. So that was really the genesis right there. I think it was 1975 was the year that I fell hard for prog, and I'd like to say I never went back, but there was a time where, in the 80s where prog kind of fell off, and I did too, so I came back to prog right around 2000, 2001. And ever since, it's kind of elbowed aside every other genre of music that I was listening to, all the indie and alternative and metal and punk and all that stuff. And now, for the past 22, 23 years, it's been nothing but prog pretty much. And like I said, the genre has suffered a little bit. And I'm here to preserve, protect, and promote my precious prog rock. How many P's can I put in one sentence, Jojo?
You've done well there. No, I get that. I get that completely. I get why you feel kind of protective of it, because, it does feel kind of precious in a way when you think about today's sort of musical trends and how, we've got TikTok and all music has to be 30 seconds long, and no one's interested after that. You can't have intros anymore. And like half of these songs, like the intro is like 10 minutes, if that even is the intro.
Exactly.
So, it is really unique and special, and, undoubtedly. And it's interesting that, like, as you talked about, you've been into different kinds of music, but I can hear so much of the influence of this kind of stuff in all of that, in all of like indie and rock and everything that came afterwards, electronic, synth pop, dance music. It's all been influenced, hasn't it? So
it absolutely has been.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. It did, because you can hear its influence in everything from Tears for Fears and XTC and the Talking Heads, and even bands like the Stranglers and Gang of Four and Wire, and a lot of that stuff that was going on in the 80s. No, they would never admit to liking prog rock, but you listen to all those bands, they were listening to it. Absolutely, they were. And then you get into the 90s, and a lot of the grunge. Listen to the Stone Temple Pilots and listen to what DeLeo's doing with some of his voicings. That's Robert Frippian, man. I mean, that's King Crimson kind of stuff.
That's a really good point, actually. The Stone Temple Pilots, I always feel they're a little bit different from quite a lot of the Seattle kind of bands. Right. I think they are. I think there's them and Smashing Pumpkins that get lumped in.
Right. They get lumped in.
But they're not necessarily. They are different, I think. And like
geography, I think played a role in it because you mentioned, it wasn't part of the Pacific Northwest. STP was that Southern Cal kind of thing. Smashing Pumpkins had that, whole Midwestern rock kind of thing. And it totally worked for them. Made them a little different, made them a little more interesting for sure. But
yeah, the influence. Yeah, the influence of prog rock is so broad and far-reaching. So I really want to understand like how to enjoy it, I guess. Because like I love music, okay? I love rock music. I'm a guitarist. So maybe if I was a drummer, because one of the threads throughout this whole playlist is the amazing complexity of the drumming on all of these tracks.
Yeah.
Right. Like these are virtuoso drummers.
I'm looking at the list and there's some heavy hitters in here. Yeah, definitely.
And I'm like, okay, maybe it's because I'm a guitarist. I don't know drums. I don't really understand. Like in my world, it's just a case of like, how loud can you do it? How noisy can you be? So I don't like all the changing time signatures and stuff. I find that very hard to follow as a listener. So, but then again, I kind of think, well, that's not necessarily true because some of the metal that I like has got odd, complex time signatures. And I'm a huge Beatles.
Any metal band today has got some prog rock influence. Yeah. Almost every single, and that started very early on. If you look at "Sad Wings of Destiny" by Judas Priest or "Seventh Son" by Iron Maiden, those are
my God, I love that. Yeah,
those are prog albums, straight up.
Yeah, like I was thinking about this because I was thinking like how lengthy quite a few of these tracks are as well.
Yeah,
and I thought, but I'd listen to Rime of the Ancient Mariner. What's that? 10 minutes or something?
It's like 13, isn't it? It's a long, it's a long one.
One of my favourite songs is 10 minutes. November Rain, Guns N' Roses. That's 10 minutes long. So it's obviously I don't have a problem with long songs. It's just I think what at the heart of it, it's the like. I get the feeling that there's about 5 or 6 different songs sometimes within these tracks that are sort of being smashed together. Yeah. And I feel like, why didn't they just make these separate songs? Why did they put it all into one song? So that's one of the questions.
That's an interesting point. I do. And I think different bands approached it in different ways. I think some bands would like stitch different components together and try to find interesting connecting tissue, either by recurring themes or something like that. Or they would take all those different themes and instead of lay them out, horizontally, they lay them vertically and just put all this weird stuff on top of each other, all these different, polyrhythms and different types of melodies going on at the same time. It is challenging to the ear, absolutely. And I think part of why my brain was ready for it as a little kid was I was a classically trained guitar player. So I grew up, studying Bach and all the counterpoint. So that whole Baroque way of, writing a fugue, that kind of thing, listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer, hearing all that classical stuff coming back, but in a more rocking setting. I think that's kind of what got me. And, you got to remember this playlist that I sent you is very time specific. I went from 1969 to 1978. Because that was a time when there was so much growth in terms of technology. From 69 to 78, it's like two different worlds. I mean, 69, when King Crimson came out within the Court of the Crimson King, the Beatles were still together, and by 78, the world had completely changed with punk and disco and, 32 track recording studios. Everything was different.
This is it. And I think one of the one of the really great aspects of prog that I talk a lot with my partner about, because he's a kind of synth pop guy, right? He likes Depeche Mode. That's his favorite band. But he's really into Kraftwerk and electronic music. And so production is a real, it's something we talk about a lot. And we kind of have both said about these tracks that, like, it's super interesting. What they were doing was so experimental and really pushing the boundaries of what you could achieve in a recording studio.
It was the experimental nature, not only of what you could do in the recording studio and what you could do with all these new instruments, this new technology, these new keyboards, and recording technology was getting so much better. I mean, so everybody was recording 4 tracks in 1969. It's crazy. So the progress is exponential there. But also concurrent with that was this post-Beatles hangover, where these labels, Frank Zappa talks about how the record labels are run by all these old men in suits. They had no idea what they were listening to, because they came from the classical branch, which is where, most of the money used to be made. Now all of a sudden this rock and roll thing's making a lot of money. So, that same guy's coming down. He has no idea. He's going to put out whatever, right? He doesn't know. He doesn't care if it's a sidelong suite, a 20-minute song. He doesn't know. He doesn't care if it sells. He's a happy fat cat, man. So it actually got way different once the 80s came in and a lot of the younger people started taking over the industry. But Depeche Mode's great, by the way.
Yes, yeah. And we've both kind of agreed that, like, prog obviously had a huge influence, kind of, in terms of they wouldn't have been able to do most of the stuff that they did had it not been for what had gone before, in terms of sort of bands like
Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and absolutely. And Blasphemous Rumors is one of my favorite songs of all time.
I love that one as well. That is one of their
good.
They are just great.
And I hear plenty of those influences in their music, like you said. But it's not just directly. It was an indirect influence also, because, again, going back, boomer that I am, I'm going back to the 70s, and the whole prog thing, there was no name for it. We didn't call it prog. Nobody had a name for it, but it was influencing everything, man. You go back to 1973, Aerosmith had Mellotrons on Dream On. There were Mellotrons on Lynyrd Skynyrd's first album. Freebird is loaded with Mellotron. There was an electric guitar solo in Cat's Cradle by Harry Chapin. It was everywhere. Everybody was influenced by it.
Yeah, but because these were the new, this was new technology, as we were saying, that everyone wanted to use it. Everyone wanted to use a Fairlight. Everyone wanted to use, a Moog. It was on everything. So, it wasn't, like you say, it wasn't just this thing, and also prog wasn't obviously just one thing. Yeah. But I think And I don't know very much about it at all, and I haven't listened to many of these bands, and I haven't even heard of a lot of them that you sent me. But I sent you like the better known stuff. I tried not to go obscure or crazy or too weird. So that shows you how little I know about it. But what I've kind of picked up on, or tried to latch onto, I suppose, is some of the stuff that's like sounds a bit like stuff I might be more familiar with. Sort of, I've been picking up quite a lot of like later Beatles-esque stuff, even some Queen.
Queen is definitely part of the equation. We talked about those indirect influences. Yeah. Bands like Led Zeppelin and Queen. Yeah. You could both, maybe say some of their music was prog. They weren't prog band.
Rhapsody, that's got to be it.
That's a prog song, man. Stairway to Heaven is a prog song.
Yes, for sure.
Through and through. That is prog rock. Zeppelin was not a prog band, but they had their prog moments, just like Queen. So the influence of prog was scattered far and wide, even though people didn't know what they were listening to. Queen, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point.
And so it's not necessarily that like, oh, it's all come. I'm not kind of saying, oh, it all came from the Beatles, but like
everything. Come on.
Yeah.
We're allowed to go there. Everything came from the Beatles, man. Absolutely, it did.
I think it did. I think everything did. It really. Did. But...
To me, without the Beatles, I wouldn't care about music. It's that simple.
No. Well, I certainly wouldn't have started playing guitar if it wasn't the Beatles.
My dad played all those jazz records. I liked them a whole bunch. The Coltrane's, the Cannonball Adderleys and the Sonny Rollins and the Eric Dolphys. And I loved all that stuff, but it didn't get my soul until I heard the Beatles.
And they'd obviously been influenced by a whole, everything that was in the generation before them. Yeah. And that included jazz, blues, soul, all of that stuff, but they just did their own unique thing, and I won't start going on about it because
we could go on and on and on about the Beatles.
Here forever,
greatest band ever, and people that know, they know. There was something in the water post Beatles, for like 5 years after the Beatles broke up in London. Not going to be replicated probably ever, because you just look at how many bands sprouted up. Not just prog,
No, just in general.
Rock. Just look at the amazing bands that sprouted up in one part of the world in a very short period of time. I blame the Beatles for it all, and the labels that were all trying to get, rich, just like, Capital.
That's what always happens, though, isn't it? That happened with Motown. That happened with grunge.
Look at all the horrible bands that got signed in the wake of Nirvana.
Because the labels are always trying to kind of, recreate that first kind of smash hit band that they found, in every band they're kind of thinking, oh, this could be the one.
It could be it. Yeah, it could be the next one. Why not?
But obviously, the whole of the music industry is completely different nowadays. It doesn't work like that anymore anyway. So we'll never kind of see that thing again, ever again anyway, just because it just doesn't work like that.
It's totally different, but different doesn't have to be bad. I think the problem with a lot of these bands back in the 70s was change happened and they weren't ready for it, and we need to be ready for change. We need to accept change. We need to be willing to understand that people digest music differently now than they did back then. And the reality is most of the kids nowadays are digesting their music via 15-second TikTok videos that are sped up anyway, just cramming in as much as they can in that very short attention span those little kids have. But sooner or later, man, that pendulum's going to swing the other way around. And, songs like Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Tarkus and Heart of the Sunrise by Yes, the kids will be listening to again. Hey, Lizzo was playing Heart of the Sunrise, at least like the first 2 minutes of it in her live set. Yeah, in between songs, like a little musical interlude. So kids are, they're hearing it in weird places. They don't know they're hearing it. And then there's bands that they probably already like to a certain degree that are prog and they didn't even know it, like Pink Floyd. Not everything Pink Floyd did was prog, but they had a moment, in the 70s where they were very progressive. Rush, the same thing. A lot of people love Rush that don't really like prog, but if you dive into records like 2112 or A Farewell to Kings or Hemispheres, that's prog rock. So there's little entry points for people, younger people, to get into prog. I don't recommend probably starting with Tarkus.
Well, I was going to say actually about one of the things I was going to say was that in a lot of these tracks, and I think it applies to Tarkus as well, there were a lot of sections where I thought, if you sped this up and put some distortion on it, you'd have a metal song. This could be, this could be a sort of modern metal song. If it was played a little bit faster with a little bit, louder and more distorted, especially a lot of the time where they're using those sort of classical and neoclassical kind kind of riffs and stuff.
Oh yeah, you see that intersect right there with the neoclassical. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So there are definitely
Yngwie Malmsteen on guitar or Keith Emerson on keyboard, that classical structure underneath is definitely it's there. So that's another influence. And you talking back on Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a lot of the people that were doing all the music for video games, right? All the gamers and stuff. There was a whole slew of them in Japan that fell in love with Keith Emerson. He was like a god in Japan. He married a Japanese girl. He was so popular there because, that whole industry was indebted to Keith Emerson. So a lot of younger people, when they listen to certain prog, they're like, that sounds like video game music. I'm like, well, yeah.
Well, it is. Jumping into the playlist. The first track.
Oh, yeah. I started out on a high note.
So this is Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who
it's Tarkus. Yeah, we went with the epic.
Yeah, and I'd heard of them because obviously they're a very famous band.
Yeah.
But I promise you, I've never heard any of their music ever before. So this is the first time I've ever heard an ELP song.
Jump right in with a 20-minute epic.
I didn't know what to make of it, and I just sat and listened to it, and I tried to follow it. I tried to kind of get to grips with what it was doing. I get that there's a kind of story, there's a sort of narrative structure, and the where it rang a bell with me was in kind of this is like going back through the mist of time in my mind to when I was 17 or 18 and studying the Romantic poets, Coleridge, sort of Kubla Khan type allegorical, William Blake,
Xanadu.
Yeah, and that kind of allegorical poetry, if you like. I don't know. I can't honestly say that I understand what it was all about.
I don't think they did either. I mean, it's about some kind of weird animal that goes into battle with some other animal, and it's like an armadillo that looks like a tank or something like that, and it dies, and it goes into the water, and it's ridiculous. The whole thing is absolutely insane. Emerson, Lake and Palmer were the most pompous, pretentious, ridiculous band of all time. I mean, dude would be like upside down playing his Hammond, jamming knives in between the keys to get sustained. Meanwhile, Greg Lake was playing on a $20,000 Persian rug that he demanded would go with him everywhere. Carl Palmer had the world's heaviest drum set that was so heavy it took like 3 different complete semis to load it in. It's just, they were ridiculous. They were insane. That's the whole point. It just makes no sense. It's so great. There was always a connection with the album cover artwork in prog that was not there with any other genre. There's you just would sit there with the gatefold and look at the artwork and listen to this wild, crazy music, and it would take you to some imaginary world that only exists in your own brain and perhaps even the artist, but half the time they were just that's the thing about prog. There was a lot of humor in it. They didn't take themselves as seriously as everybody said. Well, yes, right. But most of the bands really didn't take themselves that seriously. They were just having fun in music they liked, and that's the whole story behind Tarkus.
I see. That's why I'm glad I asked you, because I wasn't sure if there was some sort of grand allegorical like message behind this story.
Not so much here. Now certain artists definitely had some really important messaging to tell in their work. The next track on the playlist was 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. Interestingly enough, the exact same singer, that's Greg Lake. He had left King Crimson to help form Emerson, Lake and Palmer. But that song was written, the lyrics were written by Pete Sinfield. who wrote all the lyrics on the first 4 King Crimson albums. Very, very deep, very, an examination of war. Vietnam was raging at the time. So, prog wasn't always about fairies and elven creatures and mystical spiders, if you will. A lot of these bands were really experimenting with song structure. The rule book was gone. We don't have to do a 3-minute song anymore. Nobody cares anymore. We've got this album we can play with now. We can do a 20-minute song. We can do a 2-minute song, whatever we want to do. And so they were really playing around with different ways to structure songs, especially in the longer song structure, the epic. That's where you saw a lot of bands try a lot of different things. Not everything worked structurally, but to me, I just love the ambition. I love it when bands swing for the fences. Even if maybe they don't quite always hit the mark. To me, the effort is a lot of fun because it speaks to intention. And it does.
I could definitely see how ambitious that track was. And when you talked before about it being, it's clearly very classically influenced.
Oh yeah.
So it makes more sense if you think about it in the sense of a piece, a composition, a piece, like a classical.
Yeah, a lot of these bands, a lot of these artists, they were pretentious in that some of them had the audacity to think that their music could hold up with the greats. With the Beethovens, with the Mozarts, with the Brahms, with the Johann Sebastian Bachs. They really could look themselves in the mirror and say, my music's going to be listened to 200, 300 years from now. God bless them.
If that's not ambition, what is?
Yeah. Why bother? Why bother unless you're going, what's the point? Why would you want to play football? Unless you wanted to be really, really, really good at it. What's the point? I don't get it. So I do love the ambition. I think that's a big part of the appeal.
And you can tell as well, another sort of common thread throughout all of the tracks that you sent me and all of these bands and these musicians, that they're all incredible. Like the musicianship in this genre is just staggering,
And again, I'll give you a sports metaphor here. If you're a really great athlete, let's say you're 10, 11 years old, and you're just starting to realize I might be really good at a sport, right? You're probably not going to play lacrosse or some kind of bobo sport that nobody's heard of before. You're going to go where there's some money. And the same holds true in the music industry. After the Beatles, if you were a great musician, you were probably going to be influenced somehow by the rock industry. The Beatles were calling your name. So we got all these super talented instrumentalists, guys like Keith Emerson and Rick Wakeman, that could just play, classically trained guys. Nowadays, if you've got a really good musical ear, if you're a great songwriter or music's just in your blood, you're not going to go to rock and roll. Instinctively, you're going to go to pop or to R&B or to rap. You're going to go where the money is, right? So there's a little bit of that we're, swimming a little upstream with modern prog. That's why a lot of the, bands that are still playing in the genre skew just a tad bit older, but we're fighting to change that. We absolutely are.
Well, it does seem to be, it seems a shame. It's almost a waste in a way.
Yeah.
But it's great that at that time, that was where the money was and that they had those opportunities to do what they wanted to do. And you can, another thing that you can hear, I think, through all of these songs is just the freedom of expression. You can tell, these bands were they just felt completely kind of free to just do.
Isn't that beautiful? You were brought up in the 80s and the 90s where there was not a single band that was immune from the A&R guy walking into the studio, wanting to hear what the band was doing, and making artistic decisions. And that was not the case in the 70s with any of these bands. They were doing exactly what they wanted to do because, well, let's face it, they were selling millions and millions of albums and filling stadiums. Nobody cared.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like you say, well, money talks, doesn't it? Yeah. And therefore, they had this license, this amazing kind of freedom, which is, is great. But then in some ways, is that maybe a double-edged sword?
Some argue,
because there was nobody saying no to anything or holding them back from anything, then not everything that they did was.
That's right.
Maybe.
Now, my favorite band of all time is Yes. I'll admit it. I love them more than life itself. I fell in love with them in 1975, and they've always been my favorite band ever since that day. But some will argue that that exact thing happened to them. They were in a really nice career trajectory. They'd put out the Yes album, which sold great. Fragile sold fantastic. Close to the Edge got them right there. And then some people would say they just completely went off the deep end with Tales from Topographic Oceans, which was a double album with exactly 4 songs on it. 1 song per side. Some people said that was it. Prog had just kind of eaten itself. Me personally, that's my favorite album of all time. I love it more than anything. I think the pretentiousness, the willingness of Ahmet Erdogan from Atlantic Records to have one of his biggest bands deliver an album with, 4 songs on a double album. And they were okay with that. And it hit number 3 in the US, number 1 in the UK. So nobody was complaining. But in retrospect, maybe it went a little bit too far, and long-term, maybe the genre suffered because it was the target of a lot of scorn by punk rockers later on in the decade. Apparently, members of the Sex Pistols met each other because Johnny Rotten was wearing a shirt that said, I hate I hate Pink Floyd, right? Meanwhile, he was a secret fan of Vandergraaf Generator. So we know he was lying. They were always lying when they said they hated prog rock. It was just something cool and different, to be angry. Yeah. Anger was selling more than unicorns and rainbows. So.
This is it. Like, there's always an element of rivalry, or kind of newer bands putting down older bands. Yeah. Like in every generation, that's just what happens, isn't it?
I love it.
I think maybe the only band that maybe didn't happen with might be the Beatles. I think they're probably the only band that later bands didn't sort of dump on.
Not too much. For how big they were, they did have very, very little backlash.
Yeah, they got away with
they got away with money.
And I would say, I love them. I absolutely love them. But I similarly would argue that some of their later stuff disappeared up its own arse, frankly.
You say?
And I don't necessarily enjoy it all.
What do you do? What do you do? Is rock and roll art? Does that take it too far? How far can you push the genre before it's just unrecognizable and it's not really rock and roll anymore? And
well, I'm on kind of guitar YouTube, and I watch a lot of guitar YouTube as well. And I'm sort of looking at videos, commenting on videos, and there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't read a comment that's referencing King Crimson, like in 2024.
And that's something.
And I'd never heard them, so, and I didn't even know that they were prog. So when it came up on this playlist, I thought, oh, that's that King Crimson band that I keep hearing about on every other comment on guitar YouTube, talking about this, that, and the others influenced by King Crimson. So I and I think I've heard it even in reference to Nirvana and stuff like that. So,
Kurt Cobain was a big fan. And Tull. If you listen to Tull, you hear a bunch of King Crimson influences. And honestly, they influenced every single prog band. There's a story of early Yes. Before their first album came out, they went to the Marquee Club in London and they saw King Crimson play. And during the set, they're looking at each other and like, brother, we need to practice. We need to practice. And those are the guys in Yes. So yeah, King Crimson was just one of those bands that influenced everybody.
See, I knew of Robert Fripp, not because of his music. So oddly enough, I had this book. So when I was a kid and I was when I was at school, I made an electric guitar. I made this when I was 16 at school. And before we had the internet and YouTube to tell you how to do things.
Can I see the neck? Can you turn it sideways? Yeah. Let me see the neck.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful, lovely.
We used to have books that you could get books about how to make guitars and stuff, and so I had this like handbook about the electric guitar. It had a foreword by Robert Fripp.
Oh wow!
So he's there like with his glasses and all very serious and kind of talking about the history of the electric guitar and how influential it's been and kind of, I don't know, I thought he was like some sort of professor or scientist.
He gives off that vibe, that whole professorial, stuffy, my music is more important than anything in the whole wide world. Yet every Sunday, him and his wife Toya do silly videos covering, bands from the 80s and 90s. They have a sense of humor. Even when a guy like Robert Fripp even has a good sense of humor.
Yeah, like I've only recently realised that he's married to Toya Wilcox, who I used to love. I loved her.
Toya's awesome.
yeah. Like I didn't even know she was married. Never mind married.
The tentacles are everywhere, man. It's insane.
So I was really kind of excited that I get to listen to this stuff and find out what everyone's going on about. And when I kind of started, I put it on, and it first of all, it sounds kind of like a reasonably straightforward sort of rock song, and the way it's recorded, like the production, sounds a little bit. It really was reminiscent, I think, of later Beatles stuff.
Absolutely, yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So I was enjoying it, I was getting into it. And then about, 2.5 minutes in, it then just completely changed and went off into this sort of jazz piano section for a bit, which I thought, I totally wasn't ready for that to happen. And then
I don't think anybody was.
Like I was just I was just enjoying that song, and then this jazz thing happened, and then towards the end it kind of goes back into the original song. Yeah, and I just sort of thought, you know what, I could have done without that middle bit if they just stitched the beginning and end together.
I think that might be an impediment for a lot of people. Is most prog rock songs don't find that groove and stay in it. They're usually, they find that groove for, maybe 8, 12 measures, and then we're doing something else, and then we'll move into a different section. Maybe we'll come back to that later, maybe in 5 or 6 minutes, we'll, do a little reprise of that section. But you're right. It never stays in one place too long. And I think that may be a problem for some people.
It was just, I just kind of thought, oh yeah, I can get my head around this. And then it was like, oh no, I can't. and then, maybe I can, but why? I don't, it was just one of those where I thought, oh, this would have been, I think I would have enjoyed the song if it hadn't had that whole jazz bit in the middle.
And I think part of the appeal of prog is, for me anyway, I like puzzles, right? So when I hear this weird, intricate prog song and I listen to it and I have no idea what I just heard, and then I listen to it a second time and the pieces start falling into place, and the third and fourth time, all of a sudden the bigger picture starts coming into focus. That's really enjoyable for me. I think I really enjoy that process because the artist is not just asking you to participate. They're demanding that you participate. It's not really background music.
No, this is the thing. And I think what you're saying about like, it takes a few listens. I think that's a big difference, like between the sort of music that I usually listen to, which is really very accessible on the first listen. Probably if I had the time to kind of go through it a few more times or keep coming back to it and listen again and again, I think it is that kind of thing where it will make more sense the more times you hear it. But it takes that sort of few times because you won't get it on the first.
You're right. It's a commitment, and I've mentioned it before. My favorite band is Yes, and my favorite album from them is the aforementioned, the monstrosity that is Tales from Topographic Oceans, 4 songs on 4 sides. And when it came out, I hated it. I absolutely despised it. I did not like it. And then I started liking side 1. And then I found out, okay, I like side 4 too. It took me literally like 3 or 4 years of constant listening because they were my favorite band. I was not going to give up on this album. I knew there was something special there. And if it was any other band but Yes, I would have given up. I would not have put the effort in to wrap my head around this ginormous piece of art, this 80-minute basic, just one basic statement from a band at the top of their game. I didn't get it, but you know what? Through repeated listens, I forced myself. Who's going to do that? Right? I think that's probably why I've always gravitated more towards Yes than some of the other prog bands, because at the end of the day, they still remembered how to rock. You know, they had always a really great rhythm section, and Steve Howe on guitar always brought some pyrotechnics. So as a guitarist, I would think there'd be something there for you that would be interesting.
Yeah, that was the thing that I latched onto in that particular track was the guitar playing. But let's talk about that track, because that is one of the ones that I found probably slightly less challenging than some of the others. It was definitely more recognizable as kind of rock based, as it were, probably because of the guitar playing for me. But also the bass as well. Bass is great, isn't it, in that track?
Yes is a band that I think is very, to me, they're very emblematic of prog as a whole, in that there's so many different influences and things going on where you've got this bass player who thinks he's just this ultimate rock star, and then you've got this drummer who was a jazz. Bill Bruford played a very jazzy style. Then you have this guitar player who played almost like country and western. Chet Atkins is his favorite guitar player. So he's got kind of that countrified, real clean kind of, kind of thing going on. And then you've got Rick Wakeman playing all these classically inspired arpeggios and, romantic and Baroque structures and what he's doing, all fronted by this little elfin guy that could sing like a songbird he can hit C above middle C without going into falsetto, and he still does it, and he's 79 years old today.
Wow.
There's so many different things going on in that band. It shouldn't work as a whole. Absolutely shouldn't, but somehow, some way, it totally does. And I think that's kind of prog in a nutshell.
I think you might be right. I think that's that sort of sums it up, really, doesn't it? But you know, definitely on this track, I think you've pretty much described it. The vocal, outstanding, absolutely, totally agree. Like, beautiful voice, really, really outstanding vocal. Personally, I'm not that much of a fan of the Hammond organ.
Yeah.
And I heard that on actually quite a lot of these tracks.
Yeah.
It always gives me sort of tacky horror film vibes, and I'm kind of like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that.
Prog is definitely dominated by, at least from the keyboard side of things, the Mellotron, the Moog, and the Hammond. Those are like the three go-to instruments. Throw the piano in there. They all like, you know, piano interludes in their prog. So, but yeah, Hammond is a big part of the sound. Absolutely. And if you struggle a little with that, that might be problematic. But, you know, I think a lot of people that enjoy, let's say, like Deep Purple or Uriah Heep, bands like that can get pulled into the prog rock camp pretty easily because of the Hammond.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, if you put it that way. And I've never had a problem with Deep Purple. So I guess maybe it's just more noticeable, that like it's more of a feature.
Yeah.
Or it was on that particular Yes track anyway.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere on
it. It did seem to be kind of one of the main things. And yeah, I do struggle with the sound of it. But Heart of Sunrise, isn't it? That's what it's called.
Heart of the Sunrise, the final track off of Fragile. And to me, that was kind of the track that, Yes jumped off from there. That was kind of almost like a mini symphony, in that it had so many different sections that from there they expanded it into Sidelong, Close to the Edge, and then of course Tales from Topographic Oceans and Relayer, and just all these real long form songs that some people struggled with. You know, they felt like maybe you know, the song should be shorter, but you know, that was what the 80s were for, man. The 70s were for just trying to push it as far as you absolutely could, and I think that's what I love most about the genre, is that these bands didn't really care too much what I thought. They didn't care what the president of their label thought. Why? They didn't care what I thought.
Well, I could hear that Rick Wakeman on that track didn't care about anything. he was just going for it, and he was just doing whatever.
Apparently he was asked to join Yes and David Bowie's Spiders of Mars the same day.
Tough choice.
He picked Yes because he knew he would never get a songwriting credit if he was with Bowie. He knew that was never going to happen. So he stayed with, he picked Yes. And apparently their very first rehearsal, the very first day they got together with Rick Wakeman, they wrote not only Heart of the Sunrise, but Roundabout also. They wrote, basically half of their first album together as a group in one afternoon. So it's just crazy what was going on back then. Now, I got a question for you.
Yes.
I threw in one foreign language song. I threw in La Evolucion by Banco del Mutuo Soccorso.
The Italian one.
And everything else on my list was from more prominent bands, but I felt like I would be doing the prog world a disservice by just focusing on English language stuff, because prog wasn't, it was primarily a British thing, but it did spread to a lot of the world. Italy in particular was a hotbed for prog in the 70s. So I had to throw in one of my beloved Italian prog bands. So I'm real curious what your take on I figured that was very representational of Italian prog. And so I want to hear your take on that track.
Yeah. I actually thought that was another one of the ones that I actually really liked.
Cool.
Because it was so atmospheric and dramatic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's something very evocative about it. Like, it's very Italian.
Yeah.
It's just something really emotional about it. I'm not explaining it very well.
No, you were explaining it perfectly, actually. There's something, I don't know, there's something about the Italian prog that really gets me. The over-the-top dramaticism and the emotional singing. And
the emotional, that's it. It's the dramatic, the kind of, there's definitely the vocal. It's definitely the delivery. And it's a great vocal as well.
And I don't speak a lick of Italian. Not one word, but I don't need to.
I've no idea what they were talking about, but it sounded very moving.
Yeah. And like it's a matter of whatever he's singing about, it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah, it's urgent, it's moving. It's there's definitely there's kind of like there are a few changes of pace. Like, so I wasn't quite sure in some of it where they were going with it.
Yeah.
So I think there were some parts that I liked more than others because it went a little bit jazzy. Yeah. With a kind of piano bit. And I thought, oh, is it going that way? No, and then it went back the other way. But there were parts of it that really, really put me in mind of Muse.
Oh.
You know?
Awesome. There you go. Now that's another band. People like to argue all day long about whether they're prog or not. And I contend that Muse is most definitely a prog band. Absolutely.
I think so.
They're in, I've recruited them. I don't care what Matt Bellamy says. Doesn't matter.
No one cares what Matt Bellamy says.
Yeah, right.
He's actually quite local to the area where I live. He's from Devon.
Oh, cool.
And from a very small town down the road from Exeter. So they've played in Exeter quite a few. They've done a few sort of like homecoming gigs and stuff. Yeah. When they were really, or shortly after they were really, really big. And he's definitely got the pretentiousness.
Yeah, you see that whole thing, that grandiose vision. I love it. It's over the top.
Operatic vocals.
What's not to love? I love Muse. Muse is prog. They're amazing. Great band.
But yeah, this sounded a bit like a bit of an Italian Muse.
Yeah. Okay. I hear that.
But yes, it was the guitar tone was very nice. I thought.
Yeah, different. Well. And some people kind of segregate the Italian prog as a completely separate subgenre of progressive rock. And progarchives.com actually has like 16 different subgenres of prog. Right. So I tried to keep it like very specific to a certain era, a certain type of prog, because we didn't even really get into like jazz fusion or school bands like Magma, the whole rock and opposition bands like Henry Cow. I mean, the prog umbrella is huge. It's just ginormous.
It is. And where do you draw the line? Because I'm going to hopefully be doing another one of these chats all about jazz soon, because I don't know anything about jazz either. So I didn't want to kind of confuse myself even further and go into kind of jazz fusion and all that. And
that's the thing about prog, in that in its origin story, it's all about fusing together, about mixing together, whether it was classical and rock or jazz and blues. It's always been about mixing and colliding different genres together, so much so that I don't even really think prog is a genre.
It's not really.
I think it's an intention. I think it's just a way of going about doing business. I don't even really think it's a true genre in and of itself. It's just a particular sound that happened once upon a time, and boomers like me keep trying to hold on to it. But prog is not dead. There's a lot of great new bands out there, and I hope my playlist that I put together didn't indicate that it's some stale, stagnant, static kind of genre, because it's really not. There's a head-spinningly large number of new prog bands out there that send me their music on a weekly basis, and it's crazy. It's the genre that refuses to die.
And it's fascinating, like when I was going through this playlist, because I was reading through all the comments underneath these videos, and people, they love this stuff. They are passionate about it. So there's obviously something that really gets people about it.
We cherish it and we protect it, because honestly, from the late 70s on, there was a very negative connotation towards anything that was prog related. If you were a band and you had any kind of prog influence in your sound, you better not put that in your press kit, man. That better not show up in your bio. Absolutely not. If you liked any prog band, you had to pretend you hated them. Prog was a dirty word for a very, very long time. It really, really was. Or
a bit of a joke. In some ways.
Yeah, the butt of jokes, the whole, who wants to listen to a, 25-minute long Moog keyboard solo? I haven't heard any of those, but, the whole, the tropes and the memes that came up about it. Some of it's true, but most of it's not.
It definitely became a stereotype and a bit of a joke. And even though I don't know much of the actual music, I know the stereotypical image.
So as a result, those of us entrusted to protect this music, we get a little salty, right? I mean, we've been through it. We've been having to protect it and defend it for so long that all of a sudden something happened, Jojo. Something happened in the 90s. What it is it's called a generational echo, where all the people that disappeared, millions of people bought these records. Where'd they go to? What happened to them? Well, guess what? They had kids, and their kids went up in the attic and they found these record collections, and they got curious about Jethro Tull and Pink Floyd and and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So all of a sudden you saw this little generational echo where all of a sudden prog was kind of, interesting again. It coincided exactly with the rise of the internet. So now, you could find out about any band you wanted to in a second, just Google it. And then the rise of, YouTube and, that kind of stuff. Now you can, listen to any song you want in the world at any time. So it's primed, it's primed for a revival. Absolutely it is.
Well, I feel like, let's talk about the Rush track, because I feel like there are some bands, again, that sort of seem to escape this whole sort of backlash and have always been revered and loved. And obviously that's why, you had your whole beef with Andy Edwards about saying, well, they're overrated, or Neil Peart's overrated and stuff, because it really does feels to me anyway, as though it's always been, you've always been kind of cool if you say you like Rush. Yeah. Everyone kind of nods. Oh yeah, Rush. You must
Rush
be
is the beneficiary of a couple of things. First, they were a little later in the game than the Yeses and the Genesis and the Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So they spoke to the boomers, but they also spoke to the Gen Xers. So they were able to really have a broader appeal.
That's it. It's the Gen Xers. So just before, because I'm an elderly millennial. I'm just 1981. So
right on the cusp there, yeah.
Just on the cusp, but friends that I have who are maybe 5-10 years older than me, Rush is a very big thing for them. Oh yeah. And that always has been seen as being, it's cool to like them, and it always has been.
And they were smart when the whole prog rock thing had kind of run its course. They were smart enough to, put their ear to the ground, listen to the Police, listen to what was happening in the 80s, and completely change their sound. Some of the fans of their, 70s more prog stuff weren't happy with the changes, but they got simpler, so their sound, got a little more accessible, and they got even more popular, whereas all the other bands were really struggling to cope with the 80s. Rush figured it out.
I think that's it. I think that's what it is, isn't it? And that's how they rode it out, and that's how they've endured in terms of popularity.
Yep.
So I know a little bit about them. I had one of my ex-partners was very into them. I've had to watch that documentary about them. I can't remember what it was called. It came out a few years ago. But, you know, so I know a little bit about them, but quite honestly, I've never liked them purely, really, well, actually, partly because of Geddy Lee's voice, which
yes.
I just can't, like, I can't get on with it at all. Like, I just don't like the sound of it. But also because of the whole Ayn Rand stuff that, like, Neil sort of, he went, I know it was a phase, and I know, you know, everyone has their little kind of phases and getting into weird things, but
it's the Ayn Rand thing was a little weird. And if you notice the track that I put on the playlist, not by accident, I put La Via Strangiato, I put on an instrumental, so
thank you.
that maybe that wouldn't be any impediment to your enjoyment of the track. And this is actually the latest song on her, that and the Pink Floyd song, both from 78. No, the Floyd song's from 77. So La Via Strangiato 78. That was the latest song on this playlist. And had you heard the song before?
No, I hadn't. I've never heard any of their actual just instrumental tracks.
Yeah.
So I sort of pressed play.
You're bracing for impact.
And he never sang.
It never happened.
So that was great.
Yeah.
I thought that was infinitely more enjoyable than any of their stuff that I've heard before.
I understand the Geddy Lee voice. I get it. I happen to love his voice, but a lot of people hate it. So I clearly understand that.
But I similarly, like, one of the bands that I really love and I've been a massive fan of for the last 20 years is a band called The Darkness. And their singer, Justin Hawkins, he's got one of those voices where it's just you love it or hate it. Absolutely. It's one of those. It splits, you know, you can't just go, oh yeah, it's all right. It's, no, I absolutely love it, or, oh my God, shut up. I can't listen to it.
I tend to like those types of vocalists, though. The ones that are really divisive, that is this guy great or is he awful? I'm not quite sure which one, but man, that keeps me coming back for more. So,
but unfortunately, I just find Geddy Lee's singing to, I don't know, there's just something, it's like nails down a blackboard to me. I can't listen to it. But musically, I mean, of course, they are so talented, and his bass playing,
great bass player,
amazing,
amazing. And, you know, when I saw Rush, to me, just it was so much fun seeing this guy. I'm just fanboying. Rush was an important band for me, and I think a lot of it was the North American male psyche that really drove Rush to the heights that they experienced. They touched the nerve with men of a certain age, boys of a certain age at a certain time. I was right at the tail end of that. I was born in 62. So I just caught it. You know, had I been born a couple years earlier, I probably wouldn't have gotten Rush at all. But yeah, man, seeing Rush on stage, and Geddy's playing bass with his left hand. He's playing keyboards with his right hand. He's got the foot pedals going. Oh, and he's singing. I mean, forget about it, man. It was just amazing. I love Rush. I'll always love him. But yeah, Geddy's not for everybody.
They're super, super talented musicians, and you know, as a composition and as a piece of music, that track was, you know, it was clearly, like, actually one of the more, I think that was one of the kind of more structured tracks on this list. So it was kind of a bit easier to follow, bit easier to listen to, maybe, because it didn't feel like there was any part of it that was just noodling You know, it felt like it was going somewhere.
Yeah, everything serves a definite purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously the drumming is incredible, but that sort of goes without saying. And
hey, Rush didn't get to be one of the biggest bands in the world by accident. You know, they're actually amazing.
Well, and really hardworking as well. Like I've seen, you know, in that documentary, they made a lot of sacrifices. They worked incredibly hard. They made it happen, you know. So I respect them. I respect them as a band, and I respect their musicianship.
I was very biased very early on because a very early interview I had read about Rush, right about the time I first started listening to them, like in '76 when 2112 came out. They were talking about how much they loved Yes. So I'm like, okay, that's all I need to know. I just think I found a new favorite band here.
And you can hear similarities. I definitely could hear, like, just between that Yes track and that Rush track.
Yeah, for sure.
I could hear plenty of similarities between those. So either I didn't know which one had influenced the other.
Right. But, so that's again, trying to find entry points into prog. You know, if you've got a Rush fan in your family, just let them know, hey, they kind of stole that sound from Yes. So, and they admit it, you know, early on, it was more of the Led Zeppelin thing. But as they got into their prog period, I hear a whole bunch of Yes in their sound. And it's no coincidence that when Yes finally got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it was Geddy and Alex who did the induction speech. So,
right. Okay. And obviously as a guitarist, Alex Lifeson, you know, I recognize that he is a tremendously talented and incredibly highly rated guitarist in the guitar community, in the guitar world.
It's a tough thing, you know. If you've got Neil and Geddy in your band, you're going to get overshadowed, period, point blank. Nothing you can do. It doesn't matter how good a player you are. Alex was always going to be overshadowed and underrated. And because he had to play a certain way. In that band, with those two cats in your band, he had to play a certain way or else the band doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. So Alex never got the kind of credit I think that was due him. I think he's amazing. I think he's a top 10 guitar player of all time. He always knows exactly what to play. He always knows when and when not to play. And that's really hard for a guitar player to figure out when not to play, especially when you're in a three-piece. Which your instinct is to always play. Oh yeah, Alex, totally underrated. Love him so much.
Well, I've heard. I can't remember where I heard this, but it's a quote. Somebody said that when Eddie Van Halen, a journalist asked him once, you know, what's it like being the greatest guitarist of all time? He said, I don't know. Ask Alex Lifeson.
There you go. I love it.
So, you know, that he's like a guitarist.
I think so, yeah. I think to the general public, they like maybe a little more flash, you know, Randy Rhoads type players or whatnot, you know, dime bags and get a little bit more attention. But, you know, Alex is a real craftsman and he can play a lot of different styles. And you listen to the prog era of Rush in particular, where, you know, he's playing nylon string classical guitars, you know, he's playing semi-acoustics, he's playing Les Pauls, he's playing Fenders, he's just playing all kinds of different guitars, getting a lot of different interesting tones, and creating a whole style all his own, which is really hard to do, to create a recognizable guitar style. Yeah, Alex Lifeson's all that.
Yeah, he's definitely a unique and amazingly talented player. So, you know, there's always that element that I do like. It's just, you know, I don't think I'd ever be able to make it through listening to a Rush album, let's say.
You know, maybe if they had done an instrumental album.
you know, so you know, there are probably tracks that
There's a handful of instrumentals you could probably string together.
I could get along with.
There you go.
But you know, yeah. Or if I had the stems of some of their tracks, and I could just like take the vocal.
There you go. There you
Sing
go.
my own vocal.
Exactly. Create your own melody on top of it. Why not? They wouldn't mind.
No, I'm sorry. Apologies to Rush fans.
Yeah, that's all right. They can take it. They can handle it.
Well, I don't know. Like you say, some people get quite touchy, don't they?
They do. But you know, that's what we do on YouTube. We just have fun poking at people sometimes. But
you know, they're obviously one of the more famous bands on this list, and I
would say Rush, Pink Floyd, Genesis, probably the three biggest names on the list.
Yeah, and I'd heard of all of those. I haven't. I've heard a couple of Pink Floyd songs, like the really, really famous ones.
Yeah.
You know, the ones that everyone's heard because everyone on
they're kind of ubiquitous. You can't not have heard a few Floyd songs.
But I had never heard this particular track, Dogs.
Yeah.
Which I actually thought was really good. I think this is probably, I mean, this is really predictable. I hate to be predictable, but I am really predictable. And I think this was my favourite track that you sent me on the playlist.
And again, there's a reason why Pink Floyd has sold, 200, 300 million albums. I mean, people love their music. They tap into something very primordial. They're not as complicated musically as a lot of the bands. And some people will dispute that they were ever prog. Some people will say even Animals, like Animals, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, say that's not prog. I think they are, but it's a different kind of prog.
I didn't know that. I thought that they are, like, they're the most famous prog band ever.
Yeah, there are people out there that dispute it. They'll fight you about it. That's not prog.
Really? Oh, my word. So what are they if they're not prog? What
exactly.
Are they?
Well, they started out as a psych band, I guess, and they ended as an AOR band. But, what do you do with those metal albums, right? What do you do with metal? What do you do with Obscured by Clouds, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals? That's prog. Sorry.
It sounds like it is to me. I mean, like you say, it's not as complex as some of the other tracks that we've been talking about. It's certainly very long, though.
Yeah,
it goes on.
That's one of their long ones. Yeah,
and it has different sections to it. It has how many guitar solos? I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't counting. I lost count.
It's a few, and we love when David Gilmour solos, so we don't mind too much.
It's interesting. So he's never been someone who's really been on my radar much as a guitarist, and I know a lot of people who say he's the greatest guitarist of all time. And but I think I don't know. I've never heard someone play so slowly.
Yeah,
I've never heard such a slow guitar solo ever.
There are stories of him working out two notes.
Yeah.
And practicing it for 3 weeks to get it just the way he heard it in his mind. I mean, this guy would string out so much with so few notes. It's the absolute opposite of a guy like Yngwie Malmsteen, whom we referenced earlier here. This guy was the ultimate minimalist, and I'm here for it. It's a whole different way of thinking about playing the guitar.
Yeah, it completely is, right? It is, as you say, it's so minimal.
Yeah.
But it's still like he's still getting the guitar to sing,
as it were. That's what he does. That's what he does. It's all about creating the emotion. Because, there's guys out there that can play, 12, 13 notes a second all day, every day. But they can't make the guitar sing and emote quite like that. It's not, it sounds easy, right? You're a guitar player. It sounds easy what he's doing.
It does sound, it's deceptively easy.
Oh man, some of the hardest solos I've ever had to try to learn how to play have been David Gilmour solos, ironically enough, because they're so easy that it has to be just perfect or else it's totally wrong. Whereas if you're playing really fast, you can hide a few things with a legato sweep.
Absolutely. You can get away with so much more and you can fudge things and you can fluff things a little bit. And as long as you've got some distortion and can sort of...
And he plays unlike anybody else. And I think it's a big part of their sound. And I don't think they'd be nearly as interesting without it because they're not that complicated. There's not polyrhythms and, oh my goodness, this section's in 17/8 time. And, we're changing key signatures every 4 measures. There's very little of that going on with Pink Floyd. But again, that's why prog is more about intention. And the whole idea of what the band was trying to do is to create a piece of art. More than anything else, that's what they were trying to do. That's what all these bands were trying to do.
I can totally see that, and I sort of found it a bit easier as well to get into the lyrics on this particular track. It's a little bit more accessible in that regard. You can, they're very kind of clearly sung, and they're very, you can kind of work out what he's talking about, what they mean. What the message is.
Anybody that read Animal Farm will obviously figure out real fast that this is all Orwellian stuff, and it dovetails real nicely with the way Roger Waters' controversial stance politically on stuff, and it points to just how a lot of these bands, they were really talking about some interesting things. It wasn't just about airy-fairy kind of stuff. This was a politically charged album that came out right in the dead center of the punk movement. Almost Pink Floyd's answer to punk was this record. That's an interesting point, actually. Again, when you place these things in time and in the context, and how they were responding to what was going on. But obviously, everyone knows, he's always been very sort of political, hasn't he? Oh, and not exactly, for better or worse, I suppose. But it's not really a bad thing. No, I like my rock stars to have an opinion. The worst thing you can be in the entertainment business is boring. Exactly. And he's never that.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
And I find it easier, I think, to get into things that have like a message or something like that. Whereas the more sort of fantastical, mythological, or sort of folklore based stuff that some of these songs are about that's harder for me from my perspective, having just no way to relate to what it's about, I suppose. So I'll, to kind of, a case in point to illustrate that is the Jethro Tull song, which, that talking about like how prog fuses so many different things together, you really have got such a mixed bag on that track. You've got kind of folk music, classical, rock, there's kind of everything.
There really is everything. And the song we're talking about, Songs from the Wood,
Songs from the Wood,
which is probably their folkiest record, fusion of different genres into prog. One of the things that makes it so interesting and exciting is that you never know what you're going to get. Anything is welcome. Any form of music. If I can find a way to, shoehorn it into my song. I'm going to do it if it's interesting and pushes the envelope. And that's what to me was exciting about this particular album from Jethro Tull. Was it was so folk infused, this like wry sense of British countryside that I really don't quite understand being an American, but I'm absolutely completely curious about, and I want to get into this world. Yeah, it's a different kind of prog, but prog nonetheless. Jethro Tull's got that different kind of slant to it.
Well, they're another one that like they're a real kind of cult band, aren't they? I think they've got a real hardcore cult following.
They got a big following, but it's it's a band that's been together since 1967. So it's just incredible how long living some of these bands are. And prog in general, if you think about the lifespan of a band like Jethro Tull, it's just incredible that this kind of music is still around, that we're still talking about it. And we owe a lot.
I think in a way, it's like what they've done is, because they created something that did have all those kind of like folk references and a bit of classical and a bit of rock and
little blues, little jazz,
a bit of everything. That means that it isn't particularly associated with the 60s or the 70s. It's not associated with anything. It's it's its own thing.
And sometimes I think it becomes singled out and focused on the 70s, not only because that's when a lot of this stuff came up, but also the production values. The 70s recordings had a certain sound to them. There was a certain warmth to the 70s recording. Some people complain about the oversaturation in the mid, not enough high or low, but everything in the mid's a little bit ramped up too much. The dry drum sound, people complain. I love the sound of the 70s. I absolutely do. And I think a lot of the bands today, what they're trying to do is take the aesthetic without having that sound, and it's a tough square to circle, because it's almost intrinsic in prog is that 70s sound, like kind of baked into it, that production sound. So it is an artistic challenge for modern bands, and some of them have figured it out really, really well. Others not so much.
It does feel like they are, a lot of bands are trying to chase that and recreate that, because it does sound good. I mean, we actually, about this particular track, because I was talking to my partner about it, and we were actually saying how good it sounds in a production sense, and how good like the mix is and everything, and it seemed actually quite ahead of its time. In that respect.
And I think that's where a lot of these bands were, they were ahead of their time, not just from the technological aspect, but, how they were recording it, because they were fussy musos, they had nothing better to do than, complain about, the level here, the EQ there. I'm not crazy about the pan there. Let's play around with the mic positioning there. Now that overhead needs to be over. I mean, that's what they did. They lived and ate and breathed and sleep. Who spends 6 months and $500,000 on an album anymore?
No.
Nobody. Who's and better yet, who's recording in an actual recording studio anymore? Everybody's recording in their basements, in their bedrooms, right? And
using a drum machine and not, not actually having
it was a different time. And those records sounded amazing. They just did. No,
it really did. Like the actual sound of the track, the recording, everything is so, like, the arrangement is really good.
It's very clever,
Yeah, very clever. These are intelligent people. These guys, they know, like you say, they know what they're doing. And so, I think there's a lot that you can get into, and particularly if you're quite a I think the reason it appeals to quite a lot of people who are quite geeky or nerdy about music is probably because of some of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some people say that prog is, music for musicians. And there's a little bit of truth to that. Absolutely. A lot of the prog fans I know inevitably tend to be musicians of various stripes,
drummers, especially.
A lot of drummers. Yeah. A lot of drummers and keyboard players, I think.
Yeah. Well, of course, because this is their thing.
Exactly. It makes sense. It does, right?
I get that.
There was no guitar. Beethoven didn't have a guitar player.
No.
But he had keyboard players. He had, percussionists.
This is it, right? Like, I was thinking about this earlier on and about how there really is kind of something for everyone.
Yeah.
If you're a musician in prog, because whether you're a vocalist, whether you're a bass player, particularly, because bass players are always they're always the unsung heroes.
Yeah, they are.
But on all of these, or a good, 95% of these tracks, the bass is really prominent.
Yeah.
In the mix, but also in the song, in the structure of the song.
I think that's definitely one of the components of prog rock also, was the dominance of bass. And part of that is attributed to a simple mistake in the studio where Yes's second album, apparently the headphones weren't working right. The producer wasn't hearing Chris Squire's bass at all, so he just kept turning it higher and higher and higher. And Time and Word came out and had this ridiculously high bass level. And instead of it sounding wrong and wonky, it just sounded awesome. So everybody wanted to sound like Chris Squire. So yeah, I attribute a lot of that to bad headphones at Advision Studios in 1970.
I really, I want that to be true. I so want that to be true. Because
I think there's a grain of truth to that.
That's awesome. Like there was this arms race about how loud, how prominent you make the bass.
Yeah, why not?
It's there, I was on all of these. I was kind of thinking, oh, that I can really hear that bass line. Oh, it's really good. But obviously, if you've got like a complex song and it's rhythmically complex and you've got a kind of virtuoso drummer, then of course you're gonna need an excellent bass player.
And it goes hand in hand. Absolutely. Yeah. And you look at the great prog bands, they all had that, whether it was Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins and Genesis, or Bill Bruford and Chris Squire and Yes, Neil and Geddy and Rush. That was a big component to it. Absolutely. Yeah. Because a lot of prog is predicated on complicated and weird time signatures. And the only way to make that stuff sound good is with virtuosos. Otherwise, it's going to sound real weird and wrong and clumsy and pedestrian. I'm sorry. You got to be real good to be playing, in 11/8 time and make it sound like normal and have people be able to still tap their foot to it and sing along to it. It's not an easy thing. And that's why we love the prog.
Exactly. And speaking of Genesis, actually, I knew of the band, and Phil Collins obviously is one of the most famous rock stars of all time, and obviously one of the most well-known drummers. But I'd never heard drumming. I'd never properly heard his drumming really, because I've listened to a lot of his own stuff.
Right.
Which isn't that complex particularly. So I was kind of quite taken aback, I suppose, listening to this actual Genesis track, which is the
fifth of Firth.
How do you the fifth of Firth?
Yeah, that's
right. The Firth. I can't say
Firth
it.
The Firth of Fifth, not fifth of Firth. Firth. I always get that confused. I always get that backwards. I don't really.
Fifth.
Yeah.
That's like,
it's apparently a play on words that I don't understand. But yeah, Phil's drumming. I don't think 99% of the people that recognize the name Phil Collins really understand just how incredibly talented that guy is behind the drums, or at least was. He's probably not playing too good these days. He can barely walk. So, but yeah, back in his prime, I mean, this is a cat that could just as easily sit in with the jazz combo Brand X that he formed, because he was just getting a little bored just playing prog. So let's put together a jazz band too. This guy was ridiculously good. Just insane how good Phil Collins was. One of my favorite drummers of all time, actually.
Yeah, and like I hadn't realized. I obviously I knew he was in Genesis, like I say, and I've heard a lot of his solo stuff because I grew up in the 80s and he was all over the charts. So you couldn't get away from Phil Collins in the 80s. But I never particularly rated him like as a songwriter or as a singer, especially like in terms of his own stuff.
Yeah.
But on this track, that is insane. Like his performance.
He was, and this was a case where, Peter Gabriel leaves the band, and he actually was able to step up into the vocal duties. But those early Genesis records, dude was just focusing on drums, and honestly, that's the best place for him. Pop Phil Collins, it was fine. He made plenty of money. I don't begrudge anybody, making a bunch of money doing pop songs. But that era of Genesis, right before. Honestly, right before Phil got huge, everything up to like 1980, I'm cool with. But then, then the money came in, and and then it all happens. I don't begrudge anybody for making a living, though. I really don't. No. And obviously, this is kind of rather less commercial than a lot of probably their later stuff. As you say. As the years got on, they went more and more commercial. But I still say that, like, what I'd still say about it is that it still sounds quite kind of rock, I suppose, in some ways. I could hear similarities to Queen, particularly in some places in this track. Like the guitar solo, I think this was the one where I thought, you know what, if you sped this up a bit and distorted it a bit, this would be a metal piece. Oh yeah. You've obviously got a good ear. That's Steve Hackett, and one of the very earliest examples of hammer-on technique. He was a guy that was doing stuff way before metal guys were doing it, but in a different context. So it's funny that you picked up on that. I really liked that. That was one of the things that stood out for me. Although this was another one where I struggled a little bit sort of with the lyrics or trying to understand what it's about, the theme or kind of... Some kind of mythological thing. It was early Genesis. Yeah. I have no idea. So it's mythology. It's some crazy story. Who knows? Okay. So that's not particularly important, or not for you anyway. Yeah. So is it fair to say that, you kind of focus more on the music, I suppose? Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment of prog as a whole, in that a lot of prog fans enjoy a lot of instrumental prog, like Rick Wakeman solo albums and Mike Oldfield albums and stuff like that. Electronic albums, Tangerine Dream, stuff like that. So I think, honestly, vocals do take a backseat. Lyrics take a backseat in a lot of prog fans' minds. Again, because a lot of them come from musician backgrounds. Right. So maybe that might be a little bit why. And it is certainly why a lot of the modern prog bands do struggle a little bit in the vocal department. Musically, instrumentally, a lot of these modern prog bands are outstanding, but very few of them have really, really good vocalists. So I don't know if that tells you anything there. No, I think there's definitely something to that. I think so. And it goes quite a long way
in helping me to understand probably why I've never got into this music.
I think so.
Because I love singing. I love trying to sing myself, but I love listening to really great, powerful, excellent vocalists.
Yeah.
So if you think about a lot of the kind of the 80s rock and metal, there are so many incredible singers.
Ronnie James and Graham Bonnet and Bruce Dickinson and
I mean, you know, almost every band of that period had just an immensely talented singer.
Yeah.
So I love that, and I love trying to kind of like sing along with music that I like. So if that is missing, I suppose that then doesn't have as much for me to kind of get into and identify with and kind of put myself into like the music and the track.
Prog in general is not known to be anthemic.
Yeah.
And, that kind of music from the 80s and the 90s, it had that strong, powerful melodic connection, especially as you move from verse to pre-chorus to chorus. And there's that moment, right? That moment where that singer's going to have to give it everything he's got to make the song work. So you had to have that world-class singer or else the whole thing falls apart, because that's everything. The hook is everything. That's not it with Prog.
There's a distinct lack of hooks, really.
Kind of, yeah.
Like there are loads.
They're there, but they're not functioning in the same way. They're more like leitmotifs in classical music than hooks in a rock song.
That's it. There isn't that, because you don't have that sort of verse chorus structure.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you also don't necessarily have like an intro, and those bits
is all wonky and everything. Let's talk about that Gentle Giant track, because they were one of the few prog rock bands that did not rely on the epic. They never had that big long song. They didn't really need to. The way they built their songs was very compact. This is the shortest song I sent to you. I think it's under 3 minutes or something like that. How long is this thing?
It's like just over 3.
Yeah. Cogs and Cogs off of Power and the Glory.
Just over 3 minutes.
I actually use this song when people ask, what is prog? Give me an example of what is prog. I figure give them something really short so that they can listen all the way through. I throw this song at people all the time. This is prog.
I thought, like you say, it's very sort of compressed, like compact, isn't it? It launches straight in. It's got an odd time signature. Again, it's got that sort of complex sort of bass and drumming. The vocals really good. I think you're right. It's got so many of the essential elements of what prog is, just in a little sort of snippet.
Yeah. And they're fun because they were a band that brought in a little bit more of a medieval or Renaissance flavor to their sound, whereas a lot of the other prog bands were more married to either Baroque, classical, or romantic period type of inspiration. Gentle Giant was all the way back in the medieval times with some of their instrumentation, their modal harmonies, just a whole different thing. And I loved it.
Yeah. Modal harmonies, definitely. Like that is one thing that jumped out at me as well, which is feels very proggy.
Yeah, it does, right? You figure woodland elves and stuff, playing flutes and recorders, living in a tree stump or something. Yeah, that's Gentle Giant. I love those guys. Very, very cool, very influential, and very innovative use of vocal harmonies and the way they used rounds and hockets and stuff like that nobody else had really done before, but a million prog bands have done since. So had to include Gentle Giant in the little playlist we put there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd never heard of them. Like, literally didn't know anything about them. Never heard of them. But it was an interesting and really good way to kind of get into.
Now that's a cult band,
right?
That's a cult band. They got a cult following.
Are they still going?
No, they're not. But they broke up in 1980. Notable in that their lead singer Derek Schulman went on to become an A&R guy and the executive in the music business. He is responsible for signing some very prestigious acts. He discovered Bon Jovi. He discovered Cinderella. He discovered Slipknot. He discovered Men Without Hats. Yeah, the safety dance. We would have never endured that in the 80s without Derek Schulman from Gentle Giant. Oh, and also, well, probably the less said about his signing Nickelback, the better. But I guess he's responsible for that too.
Yeah, no, okay, I'm out. Like, do I forgive him because he discovered Bon Jovi? But
he had a good. I'm telling you, that dude got an ear, man. I mean, I don't like Nickelback either, but 200 million people seem to like him.
I live and let live.
Exactly.
That's what I.
And then being an American, Jojo, I had to put Kansas on the list. I had to put an American prog rock band on the list. This is a song off their debut album, which is just something very personal to me. Of all the albums I've listened to in my entire life, probably the first Kansas album I've listened to the most. So I'm curious to hear your take on American prog rock.
And again, this is probably quite predictable of me. This was my kind of second favourite on the list. I really liked this. I liked the kind of swirling piano chords and the really awesome guitar work, actually. I liked the Moog solo. Yeah. I thought that was cool. I'm a bit of a sucker for a Moog.
There you go.
And again, this is another one where I don't know what it was all about. It's obviously some kind of literature reference, maybe, but something I wouldn't know or haven't read. But just musically speaking, I thought it was great. I thought the vocal was great. And
I figured that might be why you might have latched on. The vocals, Kansas vocals, very, very strong. Steve Walsh, amazing vocalist. And I just love how Kansas took the British prog rock playbook, basically, added a fiddle player to it, and put a little bit of Americanisms into the mix, and came up with something that was unique and totally their own. Just a fantastic example of how prog might have started in the UK, but it just spread out worldwide. Even in the good old US of A, we can be proud of Kansas.
Hey, yeah, I really liked it. I'd listen to that probably over, like, definitely liked it more than like the Genesis track or some of the others. So yeah, for sure, that was like, I definitely liked it. I'd say almost as much as the Pink Floyd one, actually, to be honest. I thought it rocked.
Awesome. Great band. So, love them. They're still together, even though they've only got 2 original members left. But they're still doing it, still making it happen, playing music, recording new music. Their last 2 albums are fantastic. So yeah, prog rock is not dead, Jojo. It's alive and well. And like I said, my modem's dying. So let's wrap this up.
You have helped me so much with this, Scott. I am so grateful to you, because it's one of those things where there's no way that I could have gone off and done this on my own. I needed someone to walk me through it, guide me through it, and sort of point me point me in the right direction.
Even if you never become, a prog rock fan, it sounds like you found enough there to pique your interest a little bit and create a little bit of an appreciation for the genre and the impact and influence that it's had on every other genre of rock music since its inception. So I'm always happy to talk about it. Jojo, thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. This was awesome.
Do you want to do your sign-off thing that you do?
You want me to? I'll do it. I'll do it.
Please.
I'll do it.
Yes,
this was great, Jojo. I always love just going on and on about the greatest music ever recorded. Yeah, it's prog rock. Everybody knows it is. Anyway, boys and girls, I love you. Peace in the Middle East. Free Tibet, free the Ukraine, and God save the king. Save King Chucky. Oh, that boy's got the cancer. Bring him to America. Oh, we got them good doctors. But you know what's going to work, boys and girls? It's not going to be any of that. Oh, Billy Bob, you got them snakes? Oh, yeah. Oh, no, we got snakes. Oh, no. Look out. The snakes are going to get us. Oh, we'll be dancing with the snakes, and King Chucky will be just fine, Jojo. You have a great night. I love you. Peace.
And you. Peace.
Thanks, Jojo. I'll see you.